Happy Friday and welcome to your Newsmax Daily for June the 27th, 2025, the fourth and final Friday of the month, as well as PTSD Awareness Day. June is actually Post-Traumatic Stress Awareness Month, established through congressional efforts during the early 2000s in support of soldiers that were returning from the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And do not forget that places like the Department of Veteran Affairs and the National Center for PTSD are there to help. On the food calendar, and I'm not sure it's food, but today is National Ice Cream Cake Day. Sign me up. In the nation's capital, foreign ministers of the Congo and Rwanda are visiting President Trump at the White House today.
The one big, beautiful bill to secure our borders, turbocharge our economy, and bring back the American dream. That's what's happening, too.
That was the president at yesterday's White House One Big Beautiful event, along with House Speaker Mike Johnson and a group of working-class Americans that the administration says would be benefiting from the bill, like Border Patrol agents, a group of workers that work for tips, truck drivers, etc. This happening as the Senate experienced a setback in its hopes to pass the One Big Beautiful bill when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, came the Senate parliamentarian who said several Medicaid provisions being considered would need 60 votes to pass instead of the simple majority of 51. Okay, raise your hand if you heard of or knew anything about the Senate parliamentarian. That's what I thought. More on this from Chris Salcedo and Congressman Byron Donalds of Florida.
You know me well enough to know that the unsustainable overspending just drives me crazy. But apart from all of that, it seems the Senate is stripping away much of what made this bill sellable. What are your thoughts on that?
You're absolutely correct. A lot of these spending cut provisions are being gutted by the Senate parliamentarian. And I know that everybody at home is saying, wait, who's the Senate parliamentarian and what election did she win? The truth is, she's an employee of the Senate, been there for a very long time. And so while Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi were shoveling left-wing policy through budget reconciliation under the first half of the Biden administration, the same Senate parliamentarian is telling us that we can't make these simple spending cuts and adjustments like, making sure illegal aliens are not on Medicaid. Or if there are blue states who want to be sanctuary status and provide health care to illegals, that we will reduce the federal match for said health care. They are kicking all of that out of the bill. This is creating a real problem. So to my colleagues in the Senate, I have two options for you. Number one, take the House bill. Let's move forward. Or number two, get rid of the Senate parliamentarian. Let's actually let the members, the elected members, do their job of setting up how the budget is going to be reworked here in Washington, D.C.
I'm glad you said it that way. Let's expand on this. Senate parliamentarian, her name is Elizabeth McDonough, has ruled against a slew of core Medicaid provisions in the bill. One that would, as you mentioned, prevent taxpayer dollars from flowing to illegal aliens and child gender mutilation, child abuse. She also reportedly, at the behest of Democrats, stopped a measure aimed at reining in these rogue judges, I assume, by denying funding for these courts. She's effectively claiming these issues aren't fiscally related, but it seems to me that's all they are, is fiscally related. Parliamentarians have been fired in the past. Why isn't this woman fired today?
Well, look, I'm going to leave that up to Senator Thune and the Senate leadership, but they need to do something and they need to do it fast, because nobody during the presidential election cycle last year was talking about the parliamentarian. What they were saying was secure the nation, send criminal illegal aliens home quickly, begin deporting other illegal aliens in our country that Joe Biden let in, some 10 million of them, and let Donald Trump build a roaring American economy. We need the provisions of this bill to do it. Senate parliamentarian was never up for discussion when the American people were voting last fall.
Yeah, no more patience for left-wing extremism and anti-Americanism, in my view. Congressman, major accomplishment for President Trump at NATO, convincing 31 of the allied members to meet a new 5% defense spending target. Every other president was willing to screw over the United States taxpayers and force us to pick up the tab for all of these other nations. What do you think about NATO not only meeting its obligations after being prompted by President Trump, but now exceeding previous obligations?
Well, look, I would just say, look how much things have changed when you have real leadership that's focused on putting the American people first. There was a time a decade ago when if you even talked about the NATO countries putting up more money, you were laughed out of the room. Now they're stepping up and doing something actually good for European security, and they're now starting to flip the bill, pay the bills. This is a great thing. Major win in the hat of President Trump, because it took somebody going to the NATO countries and saying, hey, look, man, we love you guys. We are with you. But we're not going to be paying the bill for everything anymore. You got to do your part. Or to quote somebody who used to be elected in the United States, you got to pay your fair share. So now the NATO countries are going to do that. This is a good thing. It's better for America, better for Europe.
Florida Congressman and gubernatorial candidate Byron Donalds smoothly working in a nice Biden reference there on the Chris Salcedo Show. Pay your own share. Pay your share. And we'll hear more from Chris coming up in a little bit. But if you went to sleep early last night and you missed Greg Kelly Reports House Oversight and Accountability Committee Chair, Congressman James Comer was on with an update on the Biden investigation after First Lady Jill Biden's top aide skated out on testifying, which I talked about yesterday.
We've subpoenaed several people, including Dr. O'Connor, that will be coming in. So we have a lot of questions about the medical reports that Dr. O'Connor published. He published report after report saying Joe Biden was in tip-top physical condition. Now we know he has, stage 3 cancer. We know that from the debate performance and from Tapper's book and other interviews that Joe Biden was in decline. So the question remains, who was calling the shots? And if someone was using Joe Biden's signature, essentially forging his signature, then those pardons and those executive orders could be declared null and void.
By the way, do we have a law on that? All presidents use autopen, right? The Eagle Scout. You become an Eagle Scout, you get a letter from the president. I don't think the president actually signs that.
Yeah.
Where does it? I mean, there has to be a cutoff line, and if there isn't a law, maybe there should be a law. But do you have a law right now?
There's really not a law right now, and it's exactly what you said. Presidents use the autopen, just like I use an autopen, or Jim Jordan, or anyone else in Congress, to sign correspondence to the massive amounts of messages that you get. But no one uses an autopen for legal documents. I can't use an autopen to sign subpoenas. That's my legal document. Subpoenas. I have to fly back to Washington, D.C. just to sign one piece of paper. But what we've learned is Joe Biden was in the White House. He was actually in the White House, but for whatever reason, couldn't or didn't sign the documents, but they would have the autopen sign them, and they would go through this bureaucratic deal to where there would be a memo sent out to Neera Tanden, and she would then take the documents and place them in the autopen. I mean, this seems like a lot of unnecessary steps. Just have the President of the United States sign it. The fact that he didn't, on top of the clear evidence of his cognitive decline, suggests a real possibility that Joe Biden wasn't the one calling the shots.
Well, take a look at this guy and keep this in mind when you talk to Anthony Bernal, Jill Biden's top guy. Now, I hate this fake news book, but I have a feeling they talked to this Anthony character. As Jill's power rose, so did Bernal's. Biden aides would say that she was one of the most powerful first ladies in history. And as a result, he became one of the most influential people in the White House. And also this, doesn't sound like the nicest guy in the world, he was a constant source of gossip about Biden's aides, which he passed along to the First Lady. Gosh, that West Wing can be so catty and nasty under Democrats, at least.
Yeah, what we're learning, there were factions within the Biden White House. There was definitely an inner circle. I don't think Neera Tanden was actually in the Biden inner circle. We think we've identified now from her transcribed interview and other sources who the inside circle was. Certainly Bernal is one person that we believe is in the circle. That's why I've subpoenaed him to come in, and we're going to hear from Ron Klain. We're going to hear from many others in the Biden administration. We're going to bring everyone in that anyone identifies as someone who had authority over that autopen. And we're going to get answers for the American people as to who was actually calling the shots at the Biden White House, and more importantly, whether or not all these executive orders and pardons that were signed with the autopen are valid in the future. And that's a big deal. That is a significant reason as to why this investigation is needed.
Chairman Comer on Greg Kelly reports. And don't forget, President Biden or someone in the administration signed pardons for Dr. Fauci, Liz Cheney, General Milley, and others. As we were wrapping up yesterday's Newsmax Daily, I mentioned that the Defense Department was holding a press briefing on Iran, and it quickly turned into a press briefing on the press.
We're here this morning because in hunting for scandals all the time, in trying to find wedges and spin stories, this press corps and the press corps miss historic moments. You miss historic moments like 5% at NATO, which when you hear, I was in the closed-door briefing. I wish there could have been cameras in there. When you heard the prime ministers and presidents of other countries, to a man and to a woman, looking at President Trump and saying, this never could have happened, never would have happened. It seemed impossible 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 8 years ago. But here we are because of your leadership. If you ask them the question, I bet they'd say the same thing. But searching for scandals, you miss historic moments, like recruiting at the Pentagon. Historic levels in the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy. Yeah, maybe there'll be a little mention here or there. But because it was under President Trump's leadership, because Americans are responding to him as commander-in-chief, the press corps doesn't want to write about it. Or bring us to the topic of the moment, the highly successful strikes in Iran. Let me read the bottom line here. President Trump directed the most complex and secretive military operation in history, and it was a resounding success, resulting in a ceasefire agreement and the end of the 12-day war. There's been a lot of discussion about what happened and what didn't happen. Step back for a second. Because of decisive military action, President Trump created the conditions to end the war, decimating, choose your word, obliterating, destroying Iran's nuclear capabilities. I want to read some of the assessments that have been provided, because whether it's fake news, CNN, MSNBC, or the New York Times, there's been fawning coverage of a preliminary assessment. I've had a chance to read it. Every outlet has breathlessly reported on a preliminary assessment from DIA.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth in the Pentagon briefing, and back to the Chris Salcedo Show.
According to multiple U.S. agencies, including the head of the CIA and the director of national intelligence, according to Israeli assets in the region, and even according to the anti-American UN and the IAEA, massive damage was done to Iran's nuclear program. The ability to process weapons-grade uranium at 3 targeted sites, the most threatening, were destroyed or damaged beyond repair. But desperate to lash out at President Trump, left-wing media spun a yarn to undermine the commander-in-chief and prop up enemies of our nation, something the defense secretary blasted them for today.
Because you, and I mean specifically you, the press, specifically you, the press corps, because you cheer against Trump so hard, it's like in your DNA and in your blood to cheer against Trump, because you want him not to be successful so bad, you have to cheer against the efficacy of these strikes. You have to hope maybe they weren't effective. Maybe the way the Trump administration has represented them isn't true. So let's take half-truths, spun information, leaked information, and then spin it in every way we can to try to cause doubt and manipulate the public mind over whether or not our brave pilots were successful. There are so many aspects of what our brave men and women did that because of the hatred of this press corps are undermined because your people are trying to leak and spin that it wasn't successful. It's irresponsible.
Hegseth wasn't done. He targeted the Karl Rove Never Trump network and their obvious anti-Trump editorial stance, calling out one of their once trusted reporters as being one of the worst.
There were satellite photos that showed more than a dozen trucks there 2 days in advance. Are you certain none of that highly enriched uranium was moved?
Of course, we're watching every single aspect. But, Jennifer, you've been about the worst, the one who misrepresents the most intentionally. What the president says. I'm familiar.
About the ventilation shafts on Saturday night. And in fact, I was the first to describe the B-2 bombers, the refueling, the entire mission with great accuracy. So I take issue with that.
I appreciate you acknowledging that this was the first the most successful mission based on operational security that this department has done since you've been here, and I appreciate that. So we're looking at all aspects of intelligence and making sure we have a sense of what was where.
But it's not just the defense secretary who is calling out the unfair Trump bias in the press. The president himself is hammering the left-wing purveyors of narrative and their denigration of our military as a mechanism to lash out at him. President Trump taking aim at what he calls the failing New York Times and CNN for their inexcusable editorial slants. But unlike the Karl Rove Never Trump network, it appears that CNN is trying to reverse course and inject fair reporting after being roasted by the President of the United States and those in the know in government.
What we now know from that briefing, first time we know it, is that as it was designed, as these massive ordnance penetrators with significant computer software engineering went directly down those 3 ventilator shafts, specifically as designed. And until you actually do it, you never know if it's going to work. It worked. It seems to have worked flawlessly. That is very important information. I think from what I've seen, the 20,000 centrifuges, you had about 17,000 in Natanz, about 3,000 in Fordo, they are all completely destroyed. I am very confident those centrifuges are gone.
Left-wingers, never-Trumpers, and establishment GOP squishes have this anything to get Trump attitude. The Trump derangement syndrome that grips the press as a mindset that says, I don't care how many Americans I hurt. I don't care how many American enemies I have to prop up. I don't care how many lies I have to tell. I just want to get Trump. I think Americans are a little tired of all that.
That's Chris Salcedo, the self-proclaimed liberty-loving Latino, the host of the Chris Salcedo Show, 4 o'clock Eastern, 4 p.m. Eastern on Newsmax. More on the media and Democrats from Rob Finnerty.
What matters to the left is that Donald Trump must always fail. Donald Trump can never win, even when he does something that's just objectively the right thing to do, spin it. Even if that means lying and rooting against America, which is why Donald Trump said this.
Why are those numbers not in the media?
Well, they get up with the fake news, like CNN over here doesn't want to put them out because they don't like putting out good numbers. They only like putting out because I think they hate our country, actually.
That was in the Oval Office, Donald Trump telling CNN right to their face that they hate America for all of America to hear. And then immediately after that, CNN was forced to address it live on air.
For the record, since we heard President Trump say in the Oval Office that CNN hates our country, CNN does not hate our country. That should go without saying. I've been here for 32 years.
Imagine being in that position, if you will, for a moment. I'm sitting here right now. The producer tells me in my ear that I've got to tell the audience that CNN does not hate America. And then you repeat that. We just want to remind everybody at home, I've been here for 32 years, and CNN definitely does not hate America, right? Yes, that we don't hate America. That's what we're supposed to say. That's what we mean. I mean, that's what we mean. This, of course, though, is the same CNN that brought back Jeffrey Toobin. And no one ever talks about how odd that is. After his very little episode on a Zoom call with colleagues at CNN, like there aren't 10,000 other lawyers in New York City to choose from who could be your CNN legal analyst. There are more law firms in New York than anywhere else on the planet. And you brought back Jeffrey Toobin, who exposed himself during a Zoom call with female colleagues. That is CNN. And do you remember this? When cities were burning down across the country, CNN and MSNBC told the world that the Black Lives Matter protests were mostly peaceful. And if you thought that was the case, or that was a one-off, No, again, 5 years later, just a week and a half ago, they claimed that the illegal alien riots in Los Angeles were peaceful too.
I want to reiterate, this looks very intimidating. This has remained 100% peaceful.
Time and space.
Whoa. Let's go. Whoa. Let's go. Whoa. We're good, Ari. We're good.
Ari, everything's fine. No, I'm just being chased. Gunfire, Ari, but it's peaceful gunfire. They're not aiming for me. They're aiming around you, like they used to do in the Wild West, you know, when the person stands there and it goes all around them, but it doesn't hit them. That's what it feels like now. Again, this is peaceful gunfire, peaceful explosions, fireworks, really, plus Mexican flags. This is peaceful looting. These are people just grabbing things that they need for their household, their hacienda, their homes. This is peaceful primary looting. Not looting. We call it protest peaceful looting. Again, these are people just throwing stones and rocks at police cars without regard for anybody standing there. This is all peaceful CNN, peaceful stuff. This is CNN. They hate Trump so profoundly that they will lie live on TV with video next to them that goes against everything they're saying, that riots are peaceful. And we saw it for days, weeks. And after the National Guard was called in, it was clear that the protests were not peaceful. They started saying that Donald Trump provoked riots that were already happening.
We can't allow the policies of the federal government to goad us as a community and provoke us into something that we're not, because that may be what they're looking for to meet their rhetoric.
Provoking them into something they're not. That's what we just heard there. Again, this is peaceful rock throwing at ice. That's just frightening right there. It's remarkable. So Trump turned illegal alien rioters into looters, according to CNN, and Trump made them steal Nikes and loot a Zara and loot a sushi restaurant in Los Angeles. This happened. They took the cash box. It doesn't matter what Donald Trump does. He could cure cancer. We've said this before, and the left would still call him evil and say it's not the right thing. In fact, Maryland Democrat Senator Chris Van Hollen didn't want to have margaritas with an MS-13 gang member in Venezuela. Trump made him do it, right? He made him get on the plane and do that, and he ordered salt on the rim of that margarita. Van Hollen loves skinny margaritas with criminals. What Democrat doesn't? And if you weren't watching MSNBC, you might have missed this. Donald Trump telling the truth about Kilmar Obrego Garcia. So what does MSNBC do? While he's telling the truth, they cut away immediately.
In 2019, Garcia was issued a deportation order. Two separate judges affirmed Garcia was a member of MS-13, which is a gang that may be even worse.
We've been watching President Donald Trump there swearing in the new administrator.
Hey, can't let Donald Trump say anything negative about Kilmar Obrego Garcia. Back to you in studio. The truth is the legacy media's objective is not to tell the truth. They would rather see Donald Trump fail, even if it means watching America burn, even if it means siding with our enemies like Iran or Hamas or the Taliban and those mostly peaceful protesters.
Now that is some good stuff. Great analysis from Rob Finnerty. I couldn't not play that, right? And it's pretty darn funny. Although it's pretty darn sad, it's pretty funny. And Rob Schmitt talked Supreme Court with Senator Ted Cruz.
I want to talk about the Supreme Court. There's a lot of rulings we remain to see right here at the end of the session. Any day now we're going to get these rulings back. Nationwide injunctions by these low-level district court judges is a huge one. Also, birthright citizenship. Let's start with the nationwide injunctions and the idea that these district judges can just make a rule that is implemented over the entire country. Do you believe that that gets reversed by the Supreme Court? And what will that do?
So, look, I'm very hopeful that we'll see the Supreme Court rein in the abuse of nationwide injunctions. We've seen under President Trump in the last 5 months, we've seen more nationwide injunctions issued against President Trump than the entirety of the 20th century. It is unprecedented. It is lawfare, where you have Democrat state attorneys general and left-wing activist groups are going and seeking out a handful of radical judges who they know are left-wing activists just like they are, and getting these nationwide injunctions. And it is not consistent with rule of law. It's not consistent with the Constitution. And so I've got some real hope and optimism that we will see a decision from the Supreme Court in the next few days that substantially reins in those nationwide injunctions. It may not eliminate them altogether, but at a minimum puts some real guardrails and stops what I think has been a rampant pattern of abuse.
Would that really do some damage to the way that the left is fighting, the mandate of the last election?
It certainly could. This is a continuation of lawfare. We saw in the last 4 years the left engaged in lawfare to attack President Trump. And if you think about it, for more than 200 years, we never had a president of the United States indicted. We never had a former president indicted. And then Democrat prosecutors indicted President Trump not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 separate times. Every one of those, Rob, those were ultimately not about attacking Trump. They were about attacking the voters, because the Democrats were terrified that the voters were going to do what they did in November, which is overwhelmingly reelect President Trump. And this was an all-out assault on democracy. That was Lawfare Chapter 1. What we're seeing now is Lawfare Chapter 2, where the left does not like the substantive policy agenda that President Trump and a Republican Senate and Republican House were elected to adopt. And so they're going to these individual rogue district judges to issue these lawless injunctions to try to stop the agenda. For example, the Democrats' open borders was a major issue in the last election. President Trump is following through on his mandate. He is arresting, he is deporting criminal illegal aliens. And the Democrats have decided that their party is all about as many illegal aliens as possible being released into America, as many murderers and rapists and child molesters and Venezuelan gang members, and they've got rogue judges who are trying to help them out.
Yeah, so something that nobody in this country wants, but they want. They fight it in this manner, and then they sit there and scream at you about democracy with a straight face. How comical.
That is Rob Schmitt, host of Rob Schmitt Tonight with Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Yesterday, the Supreme Court upheld a Tennessee law banning certain medical procedures from transgender minors. The court also allowed lawsuits by victims of overseas terror attacks to move forward. Some other things that they will be voting on is whether parents have the right to opt their kids out from LGBTQ books in the classroom, and whether states can require online age verification for adult websites in an effort to protect children. On Wall Street, the stock markets continue moving in on all new highs after President Trump announced the deal related to trade was signed with China yesterday. The Dow rose over 400 points. This morning, China confirming that there is a deal. And this morning's personal consumption expenditures index rose 0.1% last month, putting the annual inflation rate at 2.3%, which was right in line with economists surveyed by Dow Jones. Excluding food and energy, which is what they really look at, but food and energy is almost everything, right? The core PCE was 0.2% and 2.7%. compared to the estimate of 2.6%. The Fed considers the core reading to be a better measure of longer-term trends. So there's going to make a bigger deal about it rising to 2.7% when they were expecting 2.6%. Bitcoin and other major cryptocurrencies basically flat this morning. At the time of recording, Bitcoin down about $700-800, just under $107,000. All right, be sure to keep up with today's news and all of the breaking developments throughout the weekend on Newsmax, N2, and at Newsmax.com. The news starts each and every morning with Wake Up America, including the Wake Up America Weekend Edition on Saturday and Sunday. America Right Now tomorrow morning with Tom Basili. Saturday Report, Saturday Agenda, Sunday Report, Sunday Agenda. Ambassador Nancy Brinker, Wendy Bell, The Savage Nation, Rob Carson, documentaries, special programming, and so much more. So much good stuff on Newsmax throughout the weekend. Make sure you check some of it out. I'm Tony Marino. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. If you're a baseball fan, you're in luck, because that's about all there is as far as sports. NASCAR rolling into Atlanta Motor Speedway tonight and tomorrow. When I was talking about the Senate parliamentarian coming in with some obscure ruling, I was thinking that's sort of like NASCAR, how every week there seems to be some new rule, right? All right, enjoy doing whatever you love to do over the weekend. Be safe and keep on fighting the good fight.
News breaks every minute, every day. You need the app, the Newsmax app. Find it free on your smartphone store. Then watch us anytime, anywhere.
Puka. Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.